This story is titled, My Wife's Family Pressured Me to Ditch the Prenup After I Became Wealthy, so I laid down the law and refused to be their ATM. Hi, everyone. Before we dive in, a quick favor. If you enjoy content like this, please hit the subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and makes sure you never miss out on amazing videos. Alright, let's get started. Alright, let me start from the beginning, because this mess didn't just come out of nowhere. Back when I was 23, I met Sarah. I was fresh out of college and working my first job at an IT firm in Denver. Sarah was finishing her teaching degree at the time, and we met at a mutual friend's barbecue. She had this way of making everyone laugh and feel comfortable. I'll be honest, I was hooked pretty much from day one. Sarah came from a well-off family. Her dad owned a few auto dealerships, and her mom ran a boutique in Boulder. They weren't mega rich, but they had the kind of money that made life easier. My family was solidly middle class. My dad was an electrician, my mom a nurse, and they raised me and my two brothers in a small but cozy house. We were never hungry, but things like vacations or new clothes were rare. Anyway, Sarah and I hit it off quickly. We started dating, and within a year, I knew she was the one. I proposed at a park where we used to hang out on lazy Sundays, and she said yes. Everything seemed perfect. Well, almost everything. Her parents, especially her dad, weren't thrilled about me. From the start, they made it clear they didn't think I was good enough for Sarah. It wasn't outright hostility, more like subtle comments that reminded me of my place. Stuff like, "So Matt, what's your 5-year plan?" Or, Sarah's used to a certain lifestyle. I ignored it because I loved Sarah, and she stood by me. When we started planning the wedding, her parents dropped the prenup bomb. I remember Sarah's dad calling me into his office one evening after dinner. He had this serious look on his face, like he was about to give me life-altering advice. Instead, he handed me a thick stack of papers and said, "This is just a formality, Matt. It's to protect Sarah's future. I'm sure you understand." I didn't understand. I didn't like it either. I felt insulted. Like, why did they assume I was going to take advantage of their daughter? I was barely making $40,000 a year at that IT job, but I had plans. Big ones. I wanted to prove myself, not just to them, but to Sarah and me. Still, I didn't want to cause problems. So I took the papers home and read through them with a mix of anger and confusion. The prenup basically stated that if Sarah and I ever divorced, I'd walk away with nothing but what I'd earned myself. None of her family's money, none of the assets she might inherit, nothing. It was all about protecting her, not us. I hated every line of it. I brought it up to Sarah, hoping she'd back me up. Instead, she said, "Matt, it's not a big deal. It's just paperwork. It doesn't change how I feel about you." She was calm, but I could tell she felt stuck between me and her family. I didn't want to put her in that position, so I swallowed my pride and signed it. I told myself it didn't matter because I wasn't marrying her for her family's money. Looking back, that was probably my first mistake, letting her parents set the tone for our marriage. But at the time, I thought I was doing the right thing. I figured they'd warm up to me eventually, and the prenup would be a non-issue since we were building a life together from scratch. The wedding itself was beautiful, but also a bit awkward. My family and hers didn't mix well. My brothers and a few of my cousins showed up in suits they'd borrowed or bought on sale, while Sarah's side looked like they'd stepped out of a country club catalog. There was no drama, but the divide was obvious. After we got married, we moved into a small apartment in Denver. Sarah started teaching at a local elementary school, and I kept grinding away at my IT job. Those first few years were tough but rewarding. We budgeted carefully, cooked most meals at home, and saved every penny we could. Her parents would occasionally make comments about our tight budget, but we didn't care. We were happy. Still, the prenup lingered in the back of my mind. It wasn't like I thought we'd ever need it, but it symbolized something deeper. It felt like her family didn't trust me, even after I'd married Sarah and started building a life with her. Every time her dad made a sarcastic remark about my job or our financial situation, it stung. I worked harder because of it. I wanted to prove them wrong, but the prenup never really went away. There were moments, small and fleeting, where it came up in conversation. Sarah's mom would joke about how smart they'd been to have me sign it, or her dad would bring it up when talking about protecting family assets. They said it with smiles, but it always felt like a slap in the face. Still, I didn't say anything. I kept my head down and focused on my career. I loved Sarah, and I didn't want to let her parents ruin what we had. I figured as long as we were happy, none of that other stuff mattered. But now, years later, I can see how that prenup was more than just a legal document. It was a reminder that her family didn't think I was enough. And as things started to shift in our lives, that piece of paper became the center of a storm I never saw coming. After a few years of grinding it out in my IT job, things started to change, but not overnight. It was more like little victories stacking up until they became something bigger. I was 27 when I got my first big break, but getting there wasn't as smooth as I would have liked. Back then, I was still working at the IT firm in Denver. The pay wasn't bad at the time, but it wasn't great either. I had been at the company for about 4 years, and I felt like I'd hit a wall. My role was stable, but it didn't challenge me, and there wasn't much room for growth. I knew if I wanted to make real progress, I'd have to take a risk. One of my coworkers, Jason, had started talking about this side hustle he had gotten into, freelance coding for startups. At first, I thought it sounded sketchy, like he was going to burn out juggling 2 jobs. But then he showed me his paycheck for 1 month of freelance work, and my jaw hit the floor. The guy was making double what we earned at our full-time gig. That got me thinking. I had always been good at web development and problem solving. I spent my weekends brushing up on coding languages, learning frameworks, and experimenting with side projects. Sarah thought I was crazy for spending so much time on it. "You're already working full-time," she'd say. "Why are you adding more work?" But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was an opportunity. After about 6 months of freelancing on the side, I landed a client that completely changed the game for me. They were a small tech startup looking for someone to build their entire back-end system. The pay was more than I'd ever made in a single project, but they also had the stock options they offered as part of the deal. At first, I wasn't sure if the stock options were worth much, but something about the company's vision clicked with me, so I took the gamble. For the next year, I worked like a maniac. I was still at my day job, putting in 40 hours a week, but I spent every free moment working on this startup project. Weekends, late nights, you name it. Sarah wasn't thrilled about it. She supported me, but I could tell she was frustrated that I wasn't as present as I used to be. There were arguments, mostly small ones, about me missing dinners or being glued to my laptop when we were supposed to have movie nights. I'd always say, "Just a little longer, I promise," but I don't think either of us believed it. Then, it happened. The startup I was working with got acquired by a bigger company, and my stock options skyrocketed in value. One day, I was struggling to keep up with our mortgage and car payments. The next, I had enough to pay off everything and still have a healthy cushion. I'll never forget the look on Sarah's face when I told her. She was stunned, in a good way, but I think part of her couldn't believe it was real. That moment was a turning point. I quit my IT job the following week, something I had been dreaming of for years. My boss didn't take it well. He tried to guilt trip me into staying, saying things like, "You're one of our best people, Matt. Are you sure you want to throw this away?" But I knew I was done. I had bigger plans now. The first thing I did after quitting was take Sarah on a surprise trip to Hawaii. We had been talking about going for years, but could never afford it. This was my way of showing her that the hard work had paid off and that I hadn't forgotten about us. It was amazing. Beaches, sunsets, good food. But even there, I couldn't stop thinking about what I wanted to do next. I realized I loved working for myself. The freedom, the challenge, the sense of control. It was addictive. That's when I decided to start my own company. I used the money from the startup acquisition to launch a property management business. Real estate had always interested me, and I saw it as a stable way to grow my wealth without being tied to a desk job. Starting the company wasn't easy. There were a million things I didn't know, from legal paperwork to managing employees. But I threw myself into it the same way I had with my freelance work. I read books, attended workshops, and leaned on a mentor I'd met during my freelancing days. Slowly but surely, things started to click. By the time I was 30, things were looking up in ways I couldn't have imagined a few years earlier. The property management business I started was doing well, better than I ever thought it would. We had a growing list of clients, and I'd managed to build a reliable team that took care of most of the day-to-day operations. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just scraping by or working paycheck to paycheck. I was comfortable. I was proud of how far I'd come, and I thought I'd finally earned a little respect from Sarah's family. But respect wasn't exactly what I got. It started subtly at first. Sarah's dad, Tom, would call and ask for advice on investments. It seemed innocent enough. "Hey, Matt," he'd say, "I've been looking at this opportunity to buy some commercial property downtown. What do you think?" At first, I was happy to help. I figured he saw me as someone who'd proven himself, and I appreciated that he was finally acknowledging my expertise. But then the questions became more personal. "Do you think you could invest with me? Just to help get things off the ground?" Tom asked during one of our conversations. I hesitated. On one hand, he was family, and I wanted to be supportive. On the other hand, the deal he described sounded shaky. I politely told him I wasn't in a position to invest at the time. That was the first time I noticed a shift in Tom's attitude toward me. He didn't say anything outright, but there was a noticeable coolness the next time we saw each other. Sarah picked up on it too and asked if something had happened. I brushed it off, saying, "Nah, he's probably just stressed about business stuff." But deep down, I knew he wasn't thrilled with me saying no. Meanwhile, Sarah's mom, Diane, had her own way of making things awkward. She'd casually drop hints about how expensive life had become, mentioning how hard it was to maintain their lifestyle now that Tom was semi-retired. "We're not as young as we used to be, Matt," she'd say, smiling sweetly. "Sometimes I think about how lucky you and Sarah are to have such a strong financial foundation." Lucky. That word bugged me. It wasn't luck that got me where I was. It was years of late nights, sacrifices, and hard work. But I kept quiet because I didn't want to cause any tension. Things took a more serious turn one weekend when Sarah and I went over to her parents' house for dinner. The meal started off fine, steak, and the usual small talk. But as the evening went on, Tom brought up the prenup. "You know, Matt," he said, cutting into his steak, "I've been thinking about that agreement we made you sign back when you and Sarah got married." I froze. I hadn't thought about the prenup in years. To me, it was just a formality we'd done to appease them, something that didn't matter anymore. I figured we were past all that. "What about it?" I asked cautiously. "Well, don't you think it's a little outdated now? I mean, look at how successful you've become. You've built a great life for my daughter, and I respect that. But it seems unnecessary to keep that document in place now, doesn't it?" I glanced at Sarah, who was suddenly very interested in her mashed potatoes. It was clear she knew this was coming. "I don't know, Tom," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "It hasn't really been an issue for us. Why change something that's been working fine?" Diane chimed in. "It's just that things are different now, Matt. When you got married, we were trying to protect Sarah's future. But now that you're doing so well, it feels like the prenup doesn't make sense anymore. You're family, after all." There it was. That word. Family. It was their way of making it sound like I was the one being unreasonable if I didn't agree with them. I looked at Sarah again, hoping she'd step in and back me up, but she stayed quiet. That silence was what annoyed me the most. "Honestly, I don't see a reason to get rid of it," I said finally. "It's not like it's affecting our day-to-day lives. If anything, it's just a piece of paper that's sitting in a drawer somewhere." Tom's smile tightened, and Diane gave Sarah a look, as if to say, "Can you talk some sense into him?" But no one pushed the issue further that night. On the drive home, I brought it up with Sarah. "Why didn't you say anything back there?" I asked. She sighed, looking out the window. "Because I don't want to be stuck in the middle, Matt. You know how my parents are. They just want what's best for me." "And what about what's best for us?" I countered. "This is our marriage, not theirs. The prenup hasn't been a problem for us. So why are they so focused on it now?" She didn't have a good answer. Instead, she just said, "I'll talk to them, okay? Don't stress about it." But I did stress about it. A lot. Over the next few weeks, the pressure didn't let up. Tom and Diane kept finding ways to bring up the prenup, always framing it as just a conversation. Sarah started to get more defensive about it, saying things like, "You have nothing to lose by canceling it." That's when I started to feel like I was fighting a battle on two fronts, one against her parents and one against Sarah herself. I loved her, but it was hard not to feel like she wasn't fully on my side. The breaking point came when Diane called me one afternoon while I was at the office. She started with small talk, but quickly pivoted to the prenup again. "Matt, I really think you should consider how this looks," she said. "Keeping that document in place makes it seem like you don't trust Sarah, and that's not fair to her." I'd had enough. "With all due respect, Diane," I said, "this isn't your decision to make. Sarah and I are fine with how things are." There was a pause, and then she said something I'll never forget. "Well, if you're so determined to keep it, I guess we'll just have to see how Sarah feels about that in the long run." It wasn't outright threatening, but it sure felt like a warning. I hung up the phone, furious. That night, I told Sarah what her mom had said. She didn't seem surprised. Instead, she said, "They're just worried about me, Matt. They don't mean any harm." That's when I realized this isn't just about the prenup. It's about control. Her parents had always had a say in her life, and now they are trying to extend that control to me. Update 1. Hey everyone, it's Matt again. First off, I really appreciate the advice and support I've gotten so far. Honestly, it's been a reality check. Writing about this has made me see things more clearly, and hearing from people who've been in similar situations helps. So, here's what's been happening. Things haven't improved. If anything, the pressure has ramped up. Sarah has been bringing up the prenup more and more, and I can't ignore the fact that her tone is changing. It's no longer just, "This is something we should discuss." Now it's more like, "If you trust me, you'd dissolve it." We've had a few arguments about it. The last one got heated when I told her straight up, "This isn't about trust, Sarah. It's about your parents trying to control us." She didn't like that and shot back with, "Or maybe it's about you not trusting me. What kind of husband keeps something like this in place after all these years?" That one stung. I told her, "The prenup hasn't been an issue for years, so why is it suddenly such a problem now? The only thing that's changed is that your parents see dollar signs." She called me paranoid, which seems to be her go-to argument now. At that point, I knew we needed a real conversation without distractions, so I suggested we take a trip to the cabin we used to love. It's this quiet little spot by the river, and I figured maybe we could reset and actually talk things through without her parents hanging over us like storm clouds. Sarah agreed, but her mood made it clear she wasn't thrilled about it. When we got there, things started off okay. The cabin was just like I remembered, peaceful, isolated, and the perfect place to clear your head. The first evening, we cooked dinner together, which felt normal for a change. But even then, there was this unspoken tension in the air. The next morning, I decided it was time to rip off the bandage. We were sitting on the dock, watching the river, and I said, "Sarah, I need to know what's really going on. Is this about us, or is this about your parents?" She sighed, not even trying to hide her annoyance. "Matt, this is about us. My parents don't control how I think. I'm the one saying the prenup doesn't make sense anymore. I didn't buy it. Come on, Sarah. Let's not pretend your parents haven't been pushing this from the start. They're the ones who made me sign it, and now they're the ones trying to get rid of it. That's not a coincidence." She turned to me, her face serious. "Do you even hear yourself? You're acting like my parents are the villains here when all they want is what's best for me. Best for you? What about what's best for us? This isn't their marriage, Sarah. It's ours. And I'm not going to let them dictate how we handle things." That's when she said something that made my blood boil. "Maybe the issue isn't them, Matt. Maybe it's you. Maybe you're so wrapped up in your own insecurities that you can't see how unfair this is to me." "Insecure?" I shot back. "You think I'm insecure because I don't want to tear up an agreement your parents insisted on? The same agreement they made me sign because they didn't trust me?" She shrugged and said, "Well, if you can't trust me now, maybe we shouldn't even be talking about a future together." That hit me like a brick, but I refused to let her see it. "Wow, so now you're threatening to leave because I won't bend to your parents' demands?" "Real mature, Sarah." "It's not a threat, Matt," she said, her voice cold. "It's just the truth. If you're so obsessed with this prenup, maybe you don't see me as your partner anymore. Maybe you're just waiting for me to screw up so you can walk away with everything." That was it. I stood up, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "Don't twist this around like I'm the problem here. I've worked my ass off for everything we have, and I've done it with zero help from your parents. If anyone should be questioning loyalty, it's me." She just stared at me, not saying a word, and I walked back to the cabin to cool off. The rest of the trip was a disaster. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was tense. By the time we packed up and headed home, it was clear we were on completely different pages. I've got my first therapy session this week, and I'm hoping it helps me figure out my next steps. Right now, I feel like I'm standing in the middle of a minefield, trying not to blow everything up. I love Sarah, but this situation is making me question a lot of things. If anyone's been in a situation like this, I'd love to hear how you handled it. Thanks for reading, and thanks for having my back. Update 2. Hey everyone. I wish I were coming back with better news, but things have gone from bad to worse. I'm at a point where I don't even know if my marriage can survive this. Things came to a head last Wednesday when I came home and found Sarah's entire family sitting in my living room. Her parents, her sister Amy, and even Sarah herself, waiting for me like it was some kind of intervention. The second I walked in, Tom started in on me. "Matt, we've been talking, and it's time to resolve this prenup situation. It's tearing the family apart, and we can't keep living like this." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "We?" Last I checked, this was about my marriage, not a group project. I looked at Sarah, hoping she'd step in and diffuse things, but she just sat there, staring at the floor. "Look," I said, trying to keep my cool. "I've made my position clear. The prenup stays. This is not up for discussion anymore." That's when Diane chimed in. "Matt, you're being unreasonable. Sarah has given everything to this marriage, and all you're doing is treating her like she's disposable." Disposable? I've spent the past years building a life for us while dealing with their constant interference. I told her, "With all due respect, Diane, this isn't your business. Sarah and I need to figure this out on our own." She didn't back down. "It is our business when it affects the family. If you cared about Sarah, you'd see that keeping this prenup is hurting her." Before I could respond, Tom said something that made my blood run cold. "You're not the only one with options here, Matt. Sarah deserves to be protected, and if you can't see that, maybe this marriage isn't as strong as you think." It felt like a veiled threat, and I wasn't having it. "Are you seriously suggesting that my marriage is conditional on me tearing up a legal document your family insisted on? You've got some nerve, Tom." The room went silent after that. I could see Amy, Sarah's younger sister, fidgeting uncomfortably. She always seemed like the odd one out in their family, kind of shy and not as involved in the drama. I didn't think much of it at the time, but looking back, I should have known something was up. Eventually, I told everyone to leave. I wasn't going to sit there and be ganged up on in my own home. Sarah stayed behind, and we had one of the worst fights we've ever had. She accused me of being stubborn and selfish, and I told her I was done being treated like a wallet by her and her parents. Things got so heated that she stormed out and said she was going to stay at her parents' house for a few days. I didn't stop her. The next day, I got a call from Amy. I was surprised because she and I don't talk much outside of family gatherings. She sounded nervous and asked if we could meet up in person. I agreed, thinking maybe she wanted to apologize for the intervention or offer some kind of explanation. When we met at a coffee shop, Amy looked like she hadn't slept. She kept glancing over her shoulder like she was afraid someone would see her. Finally, she said, "Matt, I overheard something the other day, and I think you need to know about it." What she told me made my head spin. Apparently, Sarah and her parents had been planning something behind my back for months. Amy had overheard them talking during a family dinner when they thought she wasn't around. They were saying that the prenup has to go before Sarah can leave you, Amy said, her voice shaking. They said it's the only way she can get what she deserves. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Leave me? Why would she want to leave? Amy hesitated, then dropped the real bombshell. Because she's been seeing someone else. Her parents know, Matt. That's why they're pushing so hard to cancel the prenup. They think if she divorces you without it, she won't get anything. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I asked Amy if she was sure, and she nodded. I didn't want to believe it either, but I heard everything. They even talked about how to spin it so it looks like you're the bad guy. I sat there in shock, trying to process what she was telling me. Amy looked genuinely upset, and I could tell she wasn't lying. Why are you telling me this? I finally asked. She sighed. Because it's not right, Matt. You don't deserve this. I've always thought you were a good guy, and I hate how my family is treating you. I don't want to be part of it. I thanked her for telling me and promised to keep her out of it. After she left, I just sat there for what felt like hours, replaying everything in my head. The long nights I spent working, the arguments about the prenup, Sarah's sudden change in attitude. It all made sense now. When I got home, I started going through our shared finances, looking for anything unusual. Sure enough, there were charges I didn't recognize. Restaurants, hotels, even a couple of jewelry stores. I haven't confronted Sarah yet, but I've started gathering evidence. I called my lawyer and told them everything. They advised me to stay calm and not make any rash decisions. But that's easier said than done. Right now, I'm trying to figure out my next move. This feels like betrayal on a level I never expected. I'm not sure what's going to happen next, but one thing's for sure. The prenup isn't going anywhere, and neither is my self-respect. If anyone has advice on how to handle this, I'm all ears. Thanks for sticking with me through all of this. Update 3. Hey everyone, it's Matt, back for, hopefully, the last time. This whole ordeal has been a wild mess, but I've finally made it through to the other side. And let me tell you, it feels damn good to have my life back. After finding out everything from Amy, who by the way is the real MVP here, I got my ducks in a row fast. My lawyer and I worked like a well-oiled machine. The evidence I had, her infidelity, the shady charges, and even her parents' involvement made the divorce process almost laughably easy. When I finally confronted Sarah, she didn't even try to deny it. She cried, played the victim, and threw out every excuse you could imagine. I felt so lonely while you were working all the time, she sobbed. You cared more about your job than me. I wasn't having it. I told her flat out, you don't get to blame me for your choices. I was busting my ass to give us a life most people dream of, and you threw it all away. At first, she tried to argue. Well, maybe if you'd paid more attention to me, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. That one hit hard, but I didn't let it show. I just said, you didn't have to do anything. You made a choice, and now you get to live with the consequences. The look on her face when I told her I'd already filed for divorce was priceless. She tried to act shocked, like she couldn't believe I'd go through with it. Then she shifted gears, begging me to reconsider. We can fix this, Matt. We can go to counseling, start fresh, whatever it takes. I told her there was no fixing this. The trust was gone, and her actions spoke louder than any apology ever could. Now let's talk about the prenup. Oh, that beautiful, life-saving document. Thanks to the ironclad agreement her family insisted on back when we got married, Sarah walked away with nothing. Not a penny of my hard-earned money. No spousal support. No division of assets. Nothing. Add her infidelity to the mix, and she didn't even have a leg to stand on legally. Her parents, of course, were furious. Diane called me multiple times, leaving these long, ranting voicemails about how I was ruining Sarah's life and how I needed to be the bigger person. The nerve of these people, right? I didn't bother responding. My lawyer told me to keep everything documented just in case they tried anything, but thankfully, they backed off pretty quickly, once they realized they had no leverage. It wasn't long after that I found out the real reason they were so desperate to get rid of the prenup. Turns out Tom and Diane's financial situation wasn't as rosy as they pretended. Their business ventures had been bleeding money for years, and they were barely keeping their heads above water. That fancy lifestyle they flaunted? All smoke and mirrors. When Sarah moved back in with them, the cracks in their perfect image started to show. She went from living in our beautiful home to crashing in her childhood bedroom. Gone were the designer clothes, spa days, and expensive dinners. From what I've heard, they're all struggling to keep up appearances, but it's only a matter of time before the house of cards comes tumbling down. And let's not forget her other guy. The man she thought she'd ride off into the sunset with? Yeah, he ghosted her as soon as things started falling apart. Amy told me he was a serial dater who had no intention of settling down. He was just stringing Sarah along for fun, and when he realized she didn't have access to my money, he dipped. So there she was, jobless, penniless, and stuck with her parents, who couldn't even help her out like they used to. Karma, right? I thought that would be the end of it. But of course, Sarah couldn't let things go. A few weeks after the divorce was finalized, she showed up at my office unannounced. My assistant tried to stop her, but Sarah pushed her way in. She looked rough. Her hair was a mess. She was wearing old, wrinkled clothes, and she had this desperate look in her eyes. "Matt," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I made a mistake. Please, I need you to forgive me." I leaned back in my chair and just looked at her for a moment. Part of me wanted to laugh at the audacity, but mostly, I just felt done. "Sarah, we've been through this. You didn't just make a mistake. You made a series of choices that destroyed our marriage. Forgiveness doesn't fix that." She tried every tactic in the book. She apologized, blamed her parents, promised she'd change, and even hinted at wanting to rekindle things. "We can start over, Matt. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." But there was no way I was going back. "Sarah, you didn't just cheat on me. You planned to leave me while trying to take what I've worked for. That's not love, and it's definitely not something I can forgive." When she realized I wasn't budging, she got angry. "You're going to regret this, Matt. You're going to end up alone, and you'll realize you pushed away the one person who really cared about you." I just shook my head and said, "Sarah, you didn't care about me. You cared about the life I provided. Now you get to figure things out on your own." I called security to escort her out, and that was the last time I saw her. Since then, life has been a lot quieter. Amy and I still keep in touch. She apologized again for her family's behavior, but honestly, she didn't need to. She was the only one who had the guts to do the right thing, and I'll always be grateful for that. As for Sarah and her parents, I've heard through the grapevine that things are getting worse for them financially. Part of me feels bad for Amy because she's stuck in the middle, but for the rest of them, they made their bed, and now they get to lie in it. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's the importance of standing your ground. People will try to take advantage of you, manipulate you, and guilt you into doing what's best for them. But at the end of the day, you have to look out for yourself. To anyone out there dealing with toxic in-laws, a shady partner, or just feeling stuck in a situation that doesn't sit right with you, trust your gut and stand up for what's right. It's not easy, but it's worth it. Thanks again to everyone who's been following my story and offering advice. Your support has meant more to me than I can put into words. Here's to moving forward and never looking back.